Okay. Okay, so let's get started. Thanks everyone for coming. This is very exciting, our first Youth Council Lunch and Learn. And as I mentioned, we have the privilege today of hearing from Sandy Hanna and Valerie Verrier, two senior advisors in our office. And I thought the simplest way to do this would be to let Sandy and Valerie introduce themselves and tell us a bit about their career trajectories, how it led them to this office, and then also spend some time talking about the files that they're responsible for in the office. And then I will just open it up for general questions from the group, because I think some questions Sandy and Valerie may want to kind of bounce off each other or add to each other's answers. So I think that might just be the easiest way. So without further ado, let's start with Sandy, just based on alphabetical order. Sandy, take it away.
Great, thank you, Vanessa, and hi to everyone. I think we've probably, many of us had a chance to speak before. If you recall, we had that session early on after the Youth Council was announced, where members of our team had a chance to interact with you and tell you a little bit about what we do in the office and our roles. And I see that Vanessa included my biography in the invite calendar. So I'm not, I don't think it'd be really interesting anyways to go through that. But I guess simply to say, and it's something I think I had mentioned when we met last, that I come to this office without a science background. So unlike many of you, I studied, or I'm assuming most of you are in non-social sciences, although it could be the fact. So I have an undergrad degree in political studies, and then for my master's, I studied international affairs. And my work in government has been really in that area. So at Transport Canada, I was on the international relations team, and I did a lot of work with the minister's office and supporting the minister whenever she and then he traveled abroad. So that's really why I was brought into the office, was to really be the lead on the international engagement of our office, talk about science diplomacy, and I mean, there's a lot of aspects to it. And to be completely honest, I was a little bit intimidated at first, because some of my colleagues were, many are like Vanessa, have PhDs, like many of you, and really, I find scientists and especially people who are good in STEM fields really impressive, because that wasn't my area of where I had necessarily shone. So I was a little bit intimidated, but I found that there's a place for everyone. And, we talk often, I'm sure, amongst your peers as well, about the value of interdisciplinary and, just getting views from different perspectives, and that makes a team stronger. So I really felt like I was able to find my niche, if you will, and bring certain aspects to the team, that others didn't have, and vice versa. So yeah, I don't know exactly what you would like to hear from me. If I think, a typical day, I will be touching on a number of things, because even though we all have certain files that we're responsible for, it's still, I would say, a relatively small office, and we need to juggle different files. So, like, for example, today, I was reviewing remarks for Dr. Niemer, because she's presenting at an international, like a Five Eyes meeting next week on research integrity and open science. I also participated in today a meeting on a possible science and technology agreement between Canada and the United States. So that's something of interest, and I'm not revealing any state secrets here. I think, like, Minister Champagne tweeted about it quite last week, I think it was. And what else? I'll well, when it's not times of the pandemic, I will also organize meetings for Dr. Niemer, like and trips abroad, and travel with her quite often. And then it's really maintaining the network too of science advisors internationally. And I'm not going to get too much into it because I know next week on, I think it's on June 18th, if I'm not mistaken, we have a special session on international science and tech. So I'm not going to speak too much about that, but suffice to say that maintaining, good relationships with the people, the science and technology counselors at our embassies and consulates abroad is really important. And I can't, speak highly enough of them and the work they do. And if I don't get a chance to say this next week, I would just say, to many of you who are maybe, I don't know, maybe you're content where you are now. Maybe you want to pursue a career in politics, or maybe some of you are interested in joining the public sector. But one thing I would say is that there's tremendous value in having scientists and people with STEM backgrounds in our foreign service, or doing sort of international work, could be from Canada. And it's a model that, the French use, especially, like they will borrow, professors from universities, and like the science attaché here at the Embassy of France to Canada is actually a scientist. And he's here for, I guess it's 4 years. And I think it's a great model because it really brings the two sort of fields of science and diplomacy together. In Canada, I find that we tend to have more career diplomats going out and being posted abroad. Some of them have science or STEM backgrounds, many don't. And it's really, it's such an advantage when you have someone who can, have a foot in both disciplines, in both fields. So that's the only thing I'll say that, might come up next week, is I would encourage some of you, if that's of interest to you, to pursue a career in the foreign service. And if that's not of interest to you, but you'd still like to do something internationally, there's opportunities to work in Canada doing international work, as you know, like across the granting agencies and Global Affairs Canada, our office, ISED, and in many departments as well, they have an international team. And the other thing is, let's say you are not in Ottawa or planning to move to Ottawa, there are regional offices across the country. And so you could consider that, or even possibly, and this is my less preferred option, because there are a number of consulates, like US consulates, let's say in Toronto and Vancouver, and of other countries. Some Canadians choose to offer their services to foreign governments. So that's why I'm saying that's my least preferred option, because we'd rather have you work for us. But that's an opportunity too, and especially if I know some people who have dual citizenship or have connections with another country, and really offer their services and work for a foreign embassy or consulate here in Canada, and that's a really enriching experience for them too. So I think I'll just one more thing I'll say, and then I'll just turn it over to you guys. And if you have any questions, I know many of you are, or some of you at least are interested in some of what the office does internationally, and specifically in establishing youth councils in other countries. And I'm really grateful and thankful to those of you that did, I think, have a few conversations with the UK. They are probably the country that is the most advanced in implementing or thinking of, developing a youth council. But last time I checked with them, they're not there yet. So there's a number of course, competing priorities. And we've had discussions, as I think with Australia, and they are much further, they're not as advanced in their thinking or even in developing a proposal as the UK, because they're really just setting up an office right now, given that it's a new chief science advisor in Australia. And I think Valerie and Vanessa were on a call, or I'm not sure if it's taken place already or will take place with New Zealand on the same subject. So yeah, so that's just an update for you. But I would say if you're interested in doing more things internationally, we can certainly. I keep that in my mind, of course, and I'm really happy to include you and have your views on whatever the topic may be. Another exercise that we're conducting right now with international counterparts is sort of an assessment of the role of chief science advisors. It's in the UK, India, the EU, New Zealand, Australia, and the US, to get a sense of what role the chief science advisor in those jurisdictions, what role they play on climate change and biodiversity conservation, which I think is again a topic that's of high interest to many of you. And so we've had a number of calls with those offices, and to get really, it's to get a sense of what they're doing, but also to use it as inspiration for us and to make recommendations to Dr. Niemer, because she's, as you know, it's a very busy field with many players, especially the climate change issue, and the chief science advisor has. So far, I would say we've done some work, but it's more behind the scenes. So we're trying to be careful, not to step on anyone's toes, and also make sure that whatever role we play would be value added, would complement efforts underway, and not, not compete with other players' responsibilities. So I think at some point it'd be really great to get the views of the Youth Council as well on this topic. If you have ideas or suggestions of, the role that specifically the chief science advisor can play, like a role that no one else really can fulfill, I'd welcome your comments. So yeah, so I'll just turn it over to you guys. It's already almost 4:15, so I don't want to take up more than half of the time here. I want to leave some time for Valerie. But if there's any questions, I'd be pleased to answer them. And you can put your hand up, or maybe you can just speak to, Ali, I think, has a hand up. Ali, you're on the.
Yeah, I did not raise my hand. I thought my
oh, okay. Then does Natasha have her hand up? Or are you all just waving to me? That's fine too.
I don't see hands. I don't know if you're seeing, Sandy, but I'm not seeing them on my end. But I was thinking that we'd actually move right to Valerie and leave the questions towards the end.
Sure.
So
you're the moderator, Vanessa.
I'm the boss today. Yeah, so so they have a bit of time to think about what's been shared and maybe synthesize some questions. So Valerie, please go ahead.
Okay. Bonjour, oui, je suis Valérie Verrier. I'm glad to meet you all, though I don't really see screen right now, but I heard a lot about your work. So yeah, I'm a senior policy advisor, only seniority, but at OCSA. But I knew the team a bit before, because when Mona was appointed in 2017, they needed help from ISED while they were hiring people. So I worked for the office for 2 months. So I knew a bit what I was getting myself into. So I was at ISED before for 10 years. So that's the Department of Innovation, Science, and Economic Development, where I mostly worked on science, technology, and innovation policy, even though I also don't have a science background. So what I do at OCSA, I provide support to Mona on the CRCC. So that's the Canada Research Coordinating Committee. That's a committee at the DM level, Deputy Minister level. they come together every month to advance federal research priorities and coordinate policies and programs across the granting agencies. So SSHRC, NSERC, CHR, CFI. So my work is mostly to prepare her for each meeting, make sure that she has a summary of all the meeting material, that I provide her suggestions or questions to ask or issues to raise or things to bring up. And if necessary, I consult with my colleagues on, what's our position on those at OCSA on a certain issue, or I consult with other departments that may be the lead on a file to get more information so I can provide that to Mona. I also lead the network of DSA. So that's the department advisors. So we have 7 DSAs plus Mona, and they meet on a monthly basis. And it's both basically to share information, share best practices, promote sort of science advice and science-based decision-making within their department, and collaborate on issues. For instance, for the last year, they've always discussed each meeting COVID-19 updates and what's going on in the different departments at the federal level. So for that, it's the same type of work in terms of preparing Mona for these meetings, but it's also, I'm considered like the secretariat for this network. So it's doing the forward planning agenda, a bit of strategic planning for the network, liaison between our office and all the departmental science advisors, minutes or other things. And I'm also lead on certain specific files, though I'm quite new to the office. So for me, these files are also new. I've recently been given the file to look at the federal science workforce. So that's part of Mona's mandate, is to report on the state of the federal government science and the federal science workforce, looking a bit at the data over the years, looking at the trends, seeing have an overview of the situation and see if there's any areas for options of recommendations of way forward. So that's a new file for me. So I'm looking forward to working on that. So in terms of my background, because in terms of my files at OCSA, I think after 4 months, I think that's about as much as I can go into details. But how I came about working on more science policy, it's a bit accidental, but it's a reflection of my interests in general. Though I never really had a career plan or anything, I just was really open to new opportunities and challenges. So you've seen my bio. So after studying economics and management, I decided to move to Europe for 5 years. So my husband's from Holland. So I wanted to work in Brussels, being a very international city and with all the EU institutions. So that why I studied European Public Affairs and a master on that. So that allowed me to work in Brussels for a few years. So I did an internship at the European Commission on trade relations with other countries. So that taught I could learn a little bit about trade negotiations with third countries. And then I worked almost for 3 years for the American Chamber of Commerce to the European Union. And that's an association of sort of the top, I would say 150 like US multinationals, companies doing business in Europe. So like association of Coca-Cola, Microsoft, GE, Boeing, Kraft Food, Facebook. And so I was in the secretariat in charge of some of the committees of companies. So there I learned a lot about consulting with companies and getting a consensus on a position, because they would bring together their position papers or position presentation on their position on certain issues, like on EU trade negotiation with third countries, or EU consumer rights and regulations, or on food labeling, even GMOs, on investment law, rules. So I learned a lot about what matters to companies in terms of regulations or IP or access to markets. And then moved back to Canada. So that's where I joined ISED. It used to be known Industry Canada back then. So that's where I learned a bit more relation between my work with companies, but also work in more science and research and development, because I worked for 4 years in the team that provides federal support to aerospace, space, and defense and security companies that do research and development. So that we had a budget of $1 billion to help companies do research and development. And the aerospace sector is quite big in Canada, especially Montreal is I think the third biggest cluster of aerospace companies in the world, after US and France, with like companies like Bombardier, Pratt & Whitney, CAE. So I was doing a lot of research and analysis of our program compared to other programs in other countries. And so I learned a lot about the different stage of research and development for companies, especially aerospace companies, in terms of basic research, prototyping, testing, and demonstrating new products and technology, communication. So, and I learned about government policy to help companies do that. So the different types of grants and contribution, different types of ways to help companies, gain market share, gain market access. And then I moved a bit more towards so that was, quite advanced research and development for companies. But then I moved towards more science policy in terms of basic science. I spent 3 years working for the Assistant Deputy Minister for Science and Innovation sector. And that's really the sector that leads the development and implementation of the government's agenda on science, technology, and innovation policy and programs. So that's all the relationship with the granting agencies like MCERC, CHR, CFI, all the relationship with the universities across that do a lot of research at universities like University of Toronto, UBC, McGill, all those universities, and all the relationship with the research organizations. So Genomics Canada, Institute for Quantum Computing, Let's Talk Science, Perimeter Institute. I'm guessing about these organizations. And also in terms of the science partnerships with and agreements with other countries. So we have a few agreements and collaboration with other countries in science. So I think that I've had other jobs within ISED, but that gives like an overview of my path towards staying in the sort of research, development, science and technology area of within the government. Et je peux répondre des questions en français aussi s'il y en a. I'll stop there.
Well, thank you. Wow. So yeah, actually, feel free to ask your question to either Sandy or Valerie in French. Now, we have about 20 minutes left. That was super interesting from both Valerie and Sandy. I think just in their description of their path to the OCSA, they've mentioned so many places where jobs exist at the intersection of science and policy. I'm certainly learning a lot myself as well. So we have about 20 minutes for your questions, and maybe I'll just start with Farah's, which she has typed here, and it's for Sandy. So she's asking, she noticed that you were a journalist at Jordan Times before. Can you tell us more about this career change and how you felt the transition was in going from a public-facing role to one where you're working more internally and likely having to be more careful about what you say or do publicly? I think a lot of us coming from academia definitely feel that transition. So Sandy, over to you.
Thanks for the question, Farah. Honestly, it's even the job that I had before entering the public service was it was a Fulbright scholarship program, a really small secretariat. I worked very closely with the executive director, and as with many NGOs, you're not as bound by certain directives in terms of communications or protocols and this and that. So even I would say even in that job, I felt a lot more liberty to express my views, and I was invited to meetings that actually with Dr. Newmer, it's a little bit different. And when I was at Transport, supporting Minister Garneau and Minister Reid before him, I had chances and I had opportunities to assist and be part of certain meetings that most people don't have a chance to experience. So I would just say that, yes, government is very different in that sense. However, even like working for a newspaper, I wasn't writing op-eds or like a blog where I share my own personal opinion. So even in that type of job, there's, I was like, yes, a freelance journalist, but I still, was checked, and there was an editor reading my things, and, I had to correspond to the sort of certain leanings of that paper. And so I would say even in that, you're not, and maybe because it's a country like Jordan, it's a little bit different, but you're not completely free to express necessarily your own opinion either. And the circumstances actually that brought me there were that my husband was, or he wasn't my husband then, we were engaged, but he was working at the UNDP in Jordan. And so we were in a long distance relationship, and I thought, well, I'd like to at least, take some time off and be with him. And they were looking for English writers at the newspaper. So that's how I ended up doing that. Also because I have an interest in communications. So I would say, I think when you join, especially from academia, so this is more to your point, when you're used to having more freedom to express yourself, and then you are part of an environment where you have to be more careful and think of the weight of your words. It doesn't just reflect on you, right? It reflects on the government, on your department, on your group. It's an adjustment. And I would say that, not to be political, but, under certain governments, they were a lot, I'll just say, like under Harper, they were very focused on controlling the message and news releases, like simple things that in the past you would just have a DG approve. These things had to be approved by PMO. That's no secret. So they controlled the message a lot more. I find with this government, there's a lot less of that. So it's, there's a little bit more breathing room, I guess. Sorry, I meant it's a really long answer to a short question, but yeah, I'll leave it at that. If no one else has questions, maybe I have a question for you. In your experience, and I'm assuming maybe most of you have had limited experience prior to this, or have not necessarily been exposed to the federal public service, but in what you've learned in the last year and a bit, I'm wondering if, does that tip the scale towards you potentially pursuing a career in the public service, or what have you learned, and does it incite you to maybe consider that as a career option or not?
We won't hold you to your answer, so feel free to answer candidly.
I can jump in. So I thank you for both of you for the nice presentation. It really gives a perspective. So as for me, I'm finishing my PG in a year. I'm completely messed up. Is it the right word? I don't know what I want to do afterwards. So I would say that this experience so far opened up perspective, which is great. And honestly having those kinds of meetings, it really helps to, at least for me, to put like a better picture of what is actually working at the office, and that's a public service. So I think that's really great. So that's my answer. If anyone wants to jump in after me.
I guess I could add to that. I'm a first-year law student, and I just graduated from CJEP in science. And I think this experience shows me that I can keep my social science and my little background in science together, and that there's a will for that, and that it's as useful. Because I feel like before being in the youth council, I would hear about it, but never saw it. So now I realize that it's an actual possibility, and it's not. I also realize that with the youth council, there's so much that's behind the scenes that we don't see in newspapers and media and whatever we hear around us. And that's like as interesting and as stimulating than like the front, very political roles.
Anybody else? I think that's it is a super interesting point, because I mean, I think by nature, the public service works in the background, right? So that's a great point, Sophie. Justine?
Oh yeah, great presentations. Thank you so much for sharing all your experiences. Yeah, just to build off of what Sophie mentioned as well, I think the perspective of having so many interdisciplinary folks in this space and just seeing how backgrounds can really interplay and add depth to the policy that's created, I think has been really, really valuable, because before then, similar to Marie, being in academia, it's kind of like you're stuck in a black hole of, just do the research without the application aspect. So yeah, being a part of this experience and like hearing your paths has been super helpful. So thank you.
Yeah, I can ask you a question, and I guess the question applies to both of you. From what you said and from reading your bio, you really jumped from like one jump to another job within the government work. How's the transition like going? So do you start every time you start at a new job, do you start like at zero and then you build up the stairs, or your experience counts or is taken into account?
Veux-tu répondre, Valérie?
Ouais, okay. I think what I can say, I think a good comparative is maybe at like in the army or the military or something. Once you go up like levels based on your experience, you can then change job within the government and maintain that level, or even go for a higher level. So you don't lose out on your experience. So for instance, I think Sandy and I think we're in the EC category. That's the economic and social science background category, and there are different levels. I think 1 to 8. And so as you progress, you get more and more responsibilities, or even you start leading a team or leading a project, or dealing with more complex files. That type of category is quite generalist, so you can use that experience to move to another job, and so you maintain your level as you move on. Of course, if you would completely change category or change study something completely different, maybe doing like maybe you would have to start over. But in our case, I think really we're being able to use our background and experience to move to another job. And that's one of the greatest thing, I think, working in the public service for me has been the opportunity to stay a public servant, but be able to move to different jobs. So I usually moved every 3-4 years. That's been about, and you don't have to look for a new company or look for you're still employed by the same employer, but you're able to try new opportunities, new challenges, work on new files, and it gave me the opportunity to work on so many different files that not always the same thing. So I like that, the option of being able to change every few years.
Yeah, so for my part, I completely, I'm like Valerie, I really like the opportunity to try on different hats, and absolutely the skills that you acquire in one job, you bring to your next job, and it's not, actually you're not at all penalized for that. And quite the contrary, I think people, hiring managers like for a person to have experiences working on different files with increasing responsibilities. So that's one of, yeah, I agree with that. It's one of the really great parts of the public service because you have access to so many opportunities. There's no excuse to be complacent, or if you're not happy in your job or your position, it's fairly easy to move. Yeah, I would say that's a great advantage. And what else I was going to say something else, but it just escaped me right now. Anyways, if it comes back to me, I'll jump in again.
Sophie?
Thank you.
I have a question on what is like because to paraphrase, to put a context to the question, you guys are in an organization that's very like acts on science, like people realize the value of science. However, how is it like broadcasting that into internally in other government agencies? Like how do they perceive science or people with a science background working in government as well as internationally?
I think very positively. I mean, and especially like a combination, I think is great. Like to have a sort of a science background with maybe something in public administration or legal study. Like people that have especially a combination of diplomas are viewed very good assets to be able to do both in terms of understand the science background, but also understand how to apply it in terms of providing policy or providing advice. So yeah.
So I remember what I was going to say. I was just going to give the example also. So there's people that move around like Valerie and I every 3 or 4 years, but then there's also people who that's not their thing. And for whatever reason, they really are like a specific file and like to stick with it. So especially I noticed like at Transport Canada, there were quite a lot of people in the programs and in the safety and security sector. They have been at Transport Canada their entire careers. And not necessarily in the same position, like they've moved up, but the engineers that are just passionate about rail safety, they want to stay in that job, and they have built such a high level of expertise that it's that's highly appreciated as well. So I would say there's both. For Valerie and I think we'd be considered more like generalists, and there's a lot of generalists in the EC stream, so the economic policy stream, if you will, and those skills are transferable. So it's you need to be able to write and analyze and be able to write memos to minister and provide policy advice and do consultations with stakeholders and all of that kind of stuff. So to answer the last question, sorry, what was it again? How they're perceived, right? How scientists are perceived. Yeah, I would agree with Valerie. It's very positive. And the nice thing again about the fact that public servants tend to move around is they get an appreciation for different sectors, right? So you don't need to necessarily convince someone who's at, I don't know, like Heritage Canada that science is important, because many people move around. Yeah, I think overall, like scientists are very welcome. It's not at all difficult to justify our existence or the rightful place of science in policymaking and evidence-based decision making. I will say one of the things, and this is just more my perspective working in international, is there's work to be done on science diplomacy and using science and technology internationally. I think, we don't, we don't brag enough about our strengths in Canada, and we go along and we do our work, but I think there's a lot of untapped potential there to really exploit our strengths in the different relationships, especially with our key partners. So.
And yeah, like Sandy said, most areas have a mix of, experts in their files and more generalists that, have more of an overview of files. And like, for instance, when I worked in the aerospace and defense sector, like Sandy said, there were people there with, engineering and science background that had been there their whole career and were really experts on these sectors and managing those programs. Because for instance, when companies apply, in our case, applied for funding, there were application of $300-400 million. You need someone to read through the application from the companies, from Bombardier, and understand what is it that they're proposing to how to use the money, what kind of technology are they going to develop. So I wouldn't be able to read something like that. You need like experts in the aerospace sector to. So that's an example of where we would need experts, science experts or engineering experts to be able to read through those kind of really detailed documents.
Thank you for your answer.
Anybody else? We have a few minutes left. Andrea with her physical hand.
Sorry, button's hard. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. These are, it's so incredible to hear from both of you, and just to get, we just have no idea that these are options, at least from my perspective, and the careers that you have had and are having. I was just wondering, like a counterpoint to the science question, how about social sciences and the adoption of, because there's a chief science advisor, but there's no chief social science advisor. So how does that kind of, that side of things, the importance of social science, do you think play in or is perceived?
I mean, where I worked, I mean, I don't think there was really a distinction. It was just, different, funding envelopes or different funding or different programs to really, target social science programs or social science research or social science, priorities and more natural science. So I think there was just like the only difference we would see is in presence in the programs. One may need more money for labs or instruments or access to big machinery, as opposed to funding for more collecting data or going on site to doing community survey. So it's just just adapting to the needs of the different types of science. But I'm not sure one was perceived. I'm not sure there was a difference in terms of how it was perceived. So I'm not sure I'm answering the question though.
Well, I'll say there's no, I guess, equivalent in social sciences to chief science advisor, but I mean, there are positions within the federal system where I guess, if you had a background in social sciences, so for example, there's a chief economist. He or she is based at Global Affairs Canada. There's, a commissioner, a privacy commissioner, a treasury board secretary. There's a chief information officer. So there's a number of positions, and I'm not naming them all here, but there's a number of positions that would play, I would say, like a similar, have a similar function in that, they can challenge what's being put forward. They are consulted on policies. And if there's any sort of issues, often they're brought to them. So I don't know if that answers your question a little bit.
All right, maybe if I can add, within the government, within the departments, there's also a lot of different committees that are brought forward on, equity, inclusion, diversity. So that's a bit of social. So there are positions that, try to improve that, or there are positions that try to work on, healthy workplace within the public service. So that, there's so many different types of ways that someone with a social science background could play a role as well. In terms of, ensuring representation across Canada in the public service, looking at statistics, looking at trends. It's a bit endless in terms of the opportunities.
I just wanted to jump in and say that we are at the end of the scheduled time. I picked 45 minutes mostly because as the first meeting, I wasn't sure how long we would need. But if Valerie and Sandy are willing to stay with us for a bit longer, just for kind of remaining questions, are we okay to stay?
Yeah, sure. This is my last thing of
awesome.
the week.
Yeah, and everybody else, if 45 minutes was what you could commit to for this meeting, then please feel free to jump off, and we will see you next time. Justine.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you folks for sacrificing your time for us on a beautiful sunny Friday. But my question pertained, and please don't feel obliged to answer it. It was just more out of curiosity, was with regards to job security. I mean, obviously from the outside, you hear a lot about governments changing and budgets happening and some departments being slashed and whatnot in terms of operating budgets. And I was just wondering if there were any points in your career where you felt super vulnerable to these shifts in power, and whether or not you would have job security or be able to bounce to other positions and have that flexibility movement.
So yeah. Oh no, I'm completely, I'm an open book, so I will answer your question. In terms of, you probably already know this, most of you, but in case you don't, so there's the ministers, whoever forms cabinet, the minister, he or she will have their staff, that the ministerial staff, and they're considered exempt staff. So that means they have, many of the same, they're bound by a lot of the same sort of conventions as public service. They have a lot of same benefits and what have you. However, the main difference is that if that government is voted out, they lose their jobs. So they get, a severance package for 6 months or something like this. But the rest of the public service, so people like Vanessa, myself, Valerie, all the way up to the deputy minister, our jobs are secure. We work, we're part of the public sector, and so our jobs are not tied to a particular government or minister. You're right that there have been, in the past some budget cuts, but I would say overall, we're represented by unions too, like very strong and capable unions. I would say that overall managers make every effort possible to cut like the frills or the training allocations rather than cut jobs. That's not to say that, some of my friends haven't, lost their jobs. It has happened. But they are put like on a list and offered other opportunities, like on a priority list and offered other opportunities. And they can, I think, like decline 2 or 3, and then they eventually have to like accept a job. So, and like, I think there's probably no job with greater security, to be completely honest. When DRAP was happening, which is something you may have heard of, and I guess it was like about 10 years ago or something. I remember in my team, we used to have like drinking, like, drinking, what do you call it, Vanessa? Like, and, so things like that, like we have no more water, just go get the tap water, or like, we had like a certain amount for training, and that year they said, okay, you guys who wanted to go on French, we're not doing this. And so again, like managers are very sensitive to that and make every effort to not cut jobs and just reduce the spending on traveling or things like that are more, I guess, frivolous.
Yeah, I remember draft, and that was when they were. I was working in aerospace, and they were cutting a few jobs, but like Sandy said, they first went and asked, who would like to take early retirement or who would like to leave the public service with.
Probably in every job that you would have, there's an effort to coordinate with colleagues from other departments. And so quite often when there's an issue before us, and it's very rare that it will just involve like your group. And so there's interdepartmental meetings that are held on a particular issue, and this is where everyone has a chance to feed in, and this happens like early on in the consultation process. I mean, I can just give you an example, like the calls that I've been having this week, and conversations on a possible science and technology agreement between Canada and the US. I mean, that touches almost every department. Certainly at least the science-based departments and the granting agencies. And so usually for something like this, it's global affairs will play, the role, the convening role, and gather all the partners. So I think there were like 80 some people on the call the other day, all representing different departments. And, there's like, not all of them speak. There's usually like a principal, like a higher level invitee and then some observers. But you do the roll call and you have the list of who, from what department is working on this issue. So if you need to follow up or if you have questions, you can do that. So I would say there's a great deal of coordination and consultation across the various departments. But that's a balancing act too, because I mean, some people kind of can complain sometimes that they're just going from one meeting to another, right? And it's hard to actually get your work done because like you're part of like, you have to, keep so many people in the loop. But yeah, but I would say it's improving, and a lot of this collaboration and coordination can be driven by individuals. And so even someone at my level, and I'm not like very high, like I'm not a director or anything, but I could initiate such a meeting, such a gathering of people at my level, right? That's usually very encouraged. Like no manager will ever say, or no director will ever say, no, don't talk to other people. Like that's a really valuable skill.
Sorry, real quick, can I follow up on that? Does it have to be like official channels, or like you were mentioning the water cooler was eliminated, but like when there was one, could you just like chat with someone about what you're working on, or is it like very hush hush?
Oh, no. Of course. Yeah. You can definitely speak to anyone about, obviously if you're talking about a secret issue and there's a person on contract who doesn't have a security clearance, then no, you have to be careful, obviously. But most of the time, no, these conversations absolutely happen by the water cooler, or, in the dining area. And actually we miss that a lot, right, during COVID, because there's not these like sort of impromptu like meetings. But my favorite thing to do is I just call people up and say, hey, I'm doing this or thinking about that. What do you think? And so absolutely, that's very encouraged. Certainly.
Yeah, definitely. Unless it's like a cabinet confidence document or something, but.
And that's almost part of your jobs, right? Is to consult, is to make sure you keep up your network. And, you know, to the extent where you're, again, you're not divulging like any sort of confidential information, even, and again, depending on the job you have, but talking to stakeholders, like talking to people outside government to get a sense, that just makes your policy or whatever your recommendation that much better, because it's more informed, and you know, you've received input from various actors.
Okay, my internet dropped for a minute there, so I missed Molly's question, but I'm sure it was great. I think it was about lateral coordination or something like that. Okay, are there any kind of last minute questions or? Okay, great. So, well, in that case, thank you to Sandy and Valerie so much for spending their Friday afternoon with us.
Thanks, guys.
And I will be in touch on Monday about the upcoming session with some international colleagues, which should be extremely exciting and informative.
And if I can just add super quickly, Vanessa, I'm sure maybe you have already done this or you will, but if you have specific questions, you know, for the folks next Friday, send them ahead of time, because it's, you know, like we don't really know like what you're interested in necessarily or what you know. So if there's things that you're curious about, I'm sure Vanessa will communicate who our speakers are for next week. But yeah, don't be shy.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Thanks. Have a great weekend.